Boa tarde, todo mundo. Eu queria agradecer muito a presença de todos para a palestra do professor e advogado David McCraw, no âmbito das atividades da Plataforma de Liberdade de Expressão e Democracia, a PLED, aqui da FGV Direito SP. É uma grande satisfação, um grande prazer receber o professor McCraw para ouvir sobre a experiência dele, atuando diretamente com as questões mais urgentes relacionadas à liberdade de imprensa e acesso à informação. Então, eu quero pedir licença para vocês para mudar para o inglês, para que todos possam acompanhar, inclusive, o professor McCraw. So, welcome, everybody. I want to thank you for your presence here today for Professor David McCraw's lecture. And I also want to thank everybody watching the lecture live online. It is great. It's a great pleasure, Professor, and great satisfaction to have you here so that we can listen and learn from your vast experience working directly with the most pressing issues concerning freedom of the press and information rights. We want to thank you very much for having accepted our invitation to be here. So Professor McCraw is the Vice President and Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times Company and an adjunct professor at the NYU School of Law. He has been working for the past 16 years as the New York Times top newsroom lawyer, and he has been the newspaper's principal legal advisor on many important and impactful stories, including the Wikileaks and Edward Snowden disclosures. So Professor McCraw will give us the lecture titled Fake News and the Real World, Press Freedom in a Time of Twitter and Trump. After his lecture, we'll have the pleasure to have Jaqueline and also Thais to comment on the lecture and pose their questions. Thank you very much, Jaqueline and Thais, for having accepted our invitation. They're both lawyers working on freedom of expression issues, freedom of the press. Jaqueline is working at Barroso, Fonteles, Barcelos, Mendonça and Associates law firm. And Thais is also working as a lawyer, and she works for many media outlets, including Folha de São Paulo, one of the main media outlets in the country. So I'll pass the word to Professor McCraw very soon, but before that, I want to invite Professor Oscar to also give us some words.
Bom, boa tarde a todas e a todos. Na realidade, é muito rápido, eu só queria dar boas-vindas a todos, a Jaqueline, minha querida amiga Thais, ao David, que eu tive o prazer de conhecer ontem. Tivemos uma boa conversa sobre o Brasil e Estados Unidos. Acho que está tudo resolvido depois da nossa conversa. I'm saying everything will be solved after our talk yesterday. Mas eu gostaria de fazer um agradecimento especial à professora Cristine Anne Mello, do Centro de Cidadania da UniCeub, que, na realidade, foram os que convidaram o professor David para vir ao Brasil. E numa agenda apertadíssima de 3 dias, ele foi a Brasília, ao Rio de Janeiro, e hoje está conosco aqui em São Paulo. Então, é uma imensa honra tê-lo aqui. Como vocês sabem, nós criamos essa plataforma há poucos meses aqui na Fundação. A Clarissa é a coordenadora dessa plataforma. E, em alguma medida, nós temos 2 objetivos muito claros ao ter criado essa plataforma. Uma primeira, e a Thais é talvez a pessoa aqui dentro dessa sala que há mais tempo está enfrentando esse problema, que a questão da liberdade de expressão no Brasil ela nunca foi muito bem resolvida, né? E o judiciário, infelizmente, tem sido um daqueles que mais coloca em risco a liberdade de expressão. Estou te olhando, mas você não precisa concordar comigo, tá? Mas nós temos tido casos muito recorrentes onde a censura vem do próprio Poder Judiciário. Tá? É um país onde não está muito claro ainda as fronteiras entre o que é privacidade, o que é liberdade de expressão. Então, um pouco do nosso objetivo é organizar esse debate, ter uma gramática um pouco mais sólida a respeito das fronteiras existentes entre esses direitos, né? Então, eu diria que é uma função tradicional que deveria ter sido resolvida no século XX no Brasil e, infelizmente, ainda não foi resolvida. E, evidentemente, que no século XXI, com as novas tecnologias, uma quantidade enorme de desafios são colocados, e esses são os desafios que também é nossa missão aqui desbravar. Então, eu agradeço a presença de todos vocês, é um prazer tê-los aqui, e é um prazer tê-los não só nesse evento, mas que estejam próximos, todos aqueles que são interessados nesses temas, estejam próximos ao nosso esforço de organizar esse debate aqui no Brasil. So, thank you, David, again. Most of what I said here today, I said to you yesterday, and it will be a great pleasure to hear your experience about the several of these hot issues that are pending on our daily life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ska. Before we start, David, I just want to remind the audience that after David will have Jacqueline and Thais, and we will open the floor for the audience to pose questions too, and we'll have an open debate on the issues that will be presented soon. Okay? Okay. So.
Thank you. Thank you. This is on. And I am honored to be here. I have been delighted in making presentations in Brasilia and Rio, and now here in Sao Paulo, to engage with the audience on these issues. And I know that we think about these issues involving fake news very differently in the United States, and so I'm interested in hearing your perspective, just as you're hearing mine. And I thank FGV for the warm welcome, and I thank you for listening to me in English, which is quite a courtesy, since I would make no sense in Portuguese, but I will try to make sense in English. 2 years ago, as a lawyer for the New York Times, I came to learn in a very personal way the power of the internet. In the middle of the presidential campaign, the Times ran a story about 2 women who said they'd been groped by Donald Trump many years before. It worked. I got it to work. Okay. There is hope. And this was the story we ran. 2 women say Donald Trump touched them inappropriately. I was sent the story before publication, which is common in our newsroom. If there's a sensitive story, it gets sent to lawyers. And I thought it was an important story. I thought it was a story that needed to be told. I had no problem with putting it up on the internet and in the newspaper for our readers. Mr. Trump disagreed. He had his lawyers write a letter to the Times demanding that we retract the story and threatening to sue us. And the Trump campaign posted their letter on the internet at the same time as they sent it to us. The next morning was very busy for me, and I had several meetings. But between the meetings, I sat down and wrote a letter in response to their letter. I only had about 45 minutes, and I worked it out, and this was the letter that I sent. Because the Trump campaign had posted the letter from Trump's lawyer online, I agreed with our people who said we should publish your letter as well. We should put your letter up on the internet. I was okay with that. As a media lawyer, I am a believer in transparency and openness. I spend my days fighting for more transparency and more openness. But you don't know anything about transparency and openness until your employer puts your telephone number and email address online, which they did when they posted this letter. There it was. Suddenly, I was getting hundreds and hundreds of messages from people around the world in response to my letter. Law students from Australia, Americans living abroad, my high school classmates, even my ex-wife wrote. That's when I knew I was an internet celebrity for a moment. More than 2 million people saw the letter, saw my letter on the Times site, and hundreds of thousands saw it on other sites. Here's somebody who has tweeted it out. Again, it's a little shocking for me. I'm kind of a private person to suddenly see my name so prominent. And out it went. The words at the end of the letter, which summarized our position, became the subject of news stories in the United States. This was how the letter ended. We did what the law allows. We published newsworthy information about a subject of deep public concern. If Mr. Trump disagrees, if he believes that American citizens had no right to hear what these women had to say, and that the law of this country forces us and those who would dare to criticize him to stand silent or be punished, we welcome the opportunity to have a court set him straight. And it was, there was a lot of attention paid to that, and you as lawyers in training or as lawyers probably understand that we didn't really welcome being sued, but it was the right thing to say. For me, it was a powerful reminder of the power of the internet. It was a chance for me to understand very personally in my life the kind of impact that digital media has on the modern world. When you step back and consider Twitter and Facebook and the other platforms and start to think about this problem of fake news, you come head to head with a strange reality. And that strange reality is at the center of the fake news problem. Never has society had more opportunity to be informed, and never has society had more opportunity to be deceived. And that's really at the intersection of the truth here. Never has there been a greater opportunity for people to have access to information and be informed. Never has society had more opportunity to be deceived. That's at the heart of this discussion of fake news and the free press. Now, I'm going to speak from a U.S. perspective, and as you know, the U.S. law is very protective of the press. It's virtually impossible for the government or anyone else to get an order stopping publication. There are many limits on libel suits. Libel suits are relatively infrequent in the United States. And relevant to this discussion, there is huge freedom on social media, and social media has played a very big impact, had a very big impact on the U.S. election. When we talk about fake news, though, I want to stress in my thinking that it's two separate problems. Let me talk about the first one. The first one is the one you think about, and that is stories that are truly fake news, stories that are intentionally fabricated and designed to fool readers. The very core definition of fake news. Those of you who did not have the pleasure or pain of suffering through the last election, let me hit some of the highlights from the election in the world of fake news. Some of you may not be going to church as often as you should. I understand that, but you did not miss this, okay? The Pope did not endorse Donald Trump while you were not going to church. This is a classic case of fake news. Pope Francis shocks the world, endorses Donald Trump for president, releases a statement. This was seen by more than 1 million people in the United States. There was a recent poll, 8% of the people still believe this, so I don't know what to make of that. And another one that was sort of a classic fake news, more than 560,000 people saw this. FBI agents suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide. There was no murder-suicide involving FBI, Hillary Clinton, or anybody else. And while rightly people think that fake news was really driven by the conservatives, in fact, there were fake news for both sides. Ireland is now officially accepting Trump refugees from America. People who are unhappy with Trump, this according to this fake news story, could move to Ireland to get away from America. I love Ireland. I'm sure they would have a great refugee camp. The beer would be great, among other things. But no, that's not true. And then there were just fake news that was fake news. And this one is one of my favorites, and I wished it were true. Women arrested for defecating on boss's desk after winning the lottery. That's not true. As much as I would like that story to be true, it's not. But it got huge readership. In 2017, my colleague Scott Shane, a reporter at the Times, decided to do a story about the people who make fake news, who was behind the story. And he came up with this incredible story about a guy named Cameron Harris, who was 23 years old, and who sat at his kitchen table and worked up this fake news site. Breaking news, tens of thousands of fraudulent Clinton votes found in Ohio warehouse, and he created this thing called News Target, completely fake. He went online and he stole this picture from an English website. This is a picture of ballot boxes, of voting boxes from Brexit, from the British election. And he put it there. Those were apparently the secret Hillary votes that were going to be used. And he purchased the website domain and did all that. He found the picture and put it up, and out it went on the internet. It was viewed by 6 million people. 6 million people came to this website, and local officials decided to investigate, to go find these boxes and get to the bottom of the fraud. Good luck, since this picture was a year old, from England, finding these boxes. He ended up making $22,000 in advertising. He had worked about 10 hours, so he made about $2,000 an hour to do this, and it was as simple as it sounds. He obviously was an amateur compared to the Russians, who we now know launched a campaign of fake websites and fake Twitter accounts and fake news. And to understand the growth of fake news is to understand the very nature of the internet, right? That is this. There is so much information out there, just incredible amounts of information produced with no editors and no gatekeepers. If you think about pre-digital media, what I call Media Landscape 1.0, things became available to the public by going through editors at newspapers or editors at television stations. There were decisions made about what should be online. No more. No gatekeepers. It's now possible to go with your information directly online. Sometimes that is a very, very good thing. Sometimes that's a good thing. Some of you may remember a story that went viral in the United States and elsewhere, and that was a story about a passenger on an airplane. There was a passenger who was on a United Airlines flight that was overbooked, and they needed one more seat. They'd sold one too many tickets. And so, for whatever reason, the flight attendants went onto the plane and dragged this guy down the aisle, screaming and injured and so forth. And people were horrified, and people on the plane started videoing it with their cell phones. No one had to call a reporter. No one on that plane had to call a reporter and say, hey, I have a story for you. No editor had to decide whether it was news. And nobody had to wait till the next morning to see the story. Those people were able to take that video, that horrifying scene of this passenger being dragged out, and put it online immediately. That, you can be sure, had a positive effect on how airlines treat people. I know this personally. I was on a flight not long after that happened to be overbooked. The flight attendant came on and got on the microphone and said, we're overbooked today. And all around, the airplane got quiet. And all around me, people pulled out their cell phones and pushed the video, wait to see what was going to happen next. And she sounded like she was a professional kidnap negotiator. No one's going to get hurt here. Everything's fine. So that was good. It was good that the voice of the people was heard and that airlines responded. But many times that's not really what happens. Ev Williams, one of the founders of Twitter, was profiled last year in the New York Times, and he talked about how the internet was broken. And he said it was broken for one reason, and that's human nature. He compared it to this. You're driving down the highway, and you see a crash on the other side of the road, and you can't help but look. You can't help but stare. And he says that same thing is true on the internet. Attention is rewarded. Attention is rewarded. Not quality, not truth, attention. And the shocking and the unbelievable web posting is going to get the clicks. So all the financial incentives are lined up to fabricate the most outrageous stories, the ones that will grab attention. And that lesson is what people who create fake news either for profit or to advance a cause have learned. let me pause here and say that no one knows for sure what the effect of fake news is, how it affects citizens. And I think we should be cautious. Many times we just assume that somebody reads a story like the Pope endorses Trump and people believe it. I think that the research suggests something much more complicated is going on. And we see stories like this which are disturbing. This was a famous story in the United States a couple of years ago. There was a fake news campaign that said Hillary Clinton was involved with a ring of people who were abusing children, sexually abusing children, and the headquarters of it was at this restaurant in Washington, and this man showed up with a gun to take care of the problem. And that was disturbing to know that that's the effect on one person. But I think we have to be careful not to overgeneralize. The research has shown that in many cases, fake news simply reinforces what people already believe. It doesn't move people to believe something new, and therefore its effect is somewhat marginal. Another study suggested that people actually, the people who are heavy users of fake news actually go to spend much time also on the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, and other sites like that, and you don't know what to make of that. Does that mean that they're checking the news? Does that mean they're checking to find out whether the New York Times is reporting the same thing, or are they trying to find out whether what they just read was true or not? We just don't know. This is how confusing it is. Washington Post story: new study suggests fake news might have won Donald Trump the election. Okay. Shortly thereafter, the New York Times had a story. Fake news has wide reach but little impact, study says. The Columbia Journalism Review followed with the headline, "Don't blame the election on fake news, blame it on the media." I do not like this story, but I think it shows people struggling to figure out what the impact is. And the one thing we do know for sure is that there is a widespread campaign of fake news. Facebook revealed that Russian influence reached 126 million through Facebook alone. That doesn't include Twitter and the other sites. And we know that the attempt to influence the elections in the U.S. continues. This was just released not long ago. Facebook discovers ongoing effort to influence the 2018 election. My own view is that the real impact of fake news is it breeds frustration and disengagement by citizens because it sows confusion and doubt. It's like a lake that's being polluted. You may not actually be harmed by anything in the water. You may not swallow any of the water. You may be fine. But the whole idea of diving in and taking a swim loses its appeal. You turn away. And I fear that that may be the response of many voters. But whatever the harm is, the harder question, I think, is this: what should be done about fake news and who should do it? What should be done and who should do it? The major platforms are struggling. Facebook originally took the position that they were no different than the telephone line. They're simply a channel, and they were not responsible for any of the message. They've now changed, and they've tried several tactics, labeling sites that appear to be fake, moving what they call trusted sources up in people's news feeds, and in at least one case, they took down just a week ago one of the major sources of fake news on the conservative side, InfoWars, run by a man named Alex Johnson. Now, they did not take it down because it was fake news. They took it down because it violated their policy on civility and hate speech, and they said that the site was encouraging bad behavior and violence towards Muslims and others. But the platforms are obviously struggling with that to figure out what can be done. That then raises what becomes an awkward question for me, and people ask this all the time. What can the law do about this? What is it that the law should do about this? Can it really be that in the U.S. the law has no answer? And that's where this man comes into play. Xavier Alvarez. Alvarez was the subject of a famous U.S. Supreme Court case in 2012. The decision in his case begins in a way that gets quoted many times, and it was, lying was his habit. Mr. Alvarez told people that he was a professional athlete. That was not true. He said he had once been married to a famous actress. That wasn't true either. And then he announced to people at a meeting that he had won the highest medal for military bravery, the Congressional Medal of Honor. For that, he was charged with a federal crime, lying about his military honors. Who knew? But that's a crime to lie about. In the U.S., that was a crime to lie about military honors. Mr. Alvarez, who obviously likes his medals, decided to fight that. He argued that lying was no crime. Simply lying about a fact was no crime, that he had a First Amendment right to lie, and the U.S. Supreme Court agreed. Now, obviously, there are times when lies are the subject of legal penalties. If you libel somebody, you hurt somebody's reputation with a lie, you can be sued. If you lie to gain money, you can be sued for fraud. You can be charged with fraud. But if you just lie about a public event or your background or your experience, that is not a crime, the Supreme Court said. It decided that the government shouldn't be in the business of policing lying. The court said in its opinion, we don't need the government to be a ministry of truth punishing people who lie. And I think from the court's, from my perspective as a U.S. lawyer defending a major U.S. publication, the court was right. It is dangerous for the government to be deciding who can speak and who can't, even when it involves lying and deception. So what is the answer? And I don't have a neat solution, but I have what I think reflects the American solution, and that is we need to have better readers and viewers and users of social media. We need to have people who have critical thinking skills and use them in separating fact from truth. That is not a satisfying answer, I understand. No law will get us there. No government program can achieve that. It undoubtedly will be a long and hard process, and it's not even clear how we can do it. But ultimately, I think that is the most important thing we can do, and is ultimately the only solution to fake news, is that we have people who are willing to look at what they read, the content they get online critically, and make decisions. We've seen around the world countries taking a different approach and trying to pass laws against fake news. That's understandable. And maybe somebody will find a way to both balance fake news and the right of free speech, balance taking down fake news and respecting the right of free speech. But in most countries passing such laws, it has nothing to do with the pursuit of truth. If you look at Egypt, Indonesia, Turkey, places that are passing fake news laws, they are really about suppressing the truth. They are being passed so the government will have one more tool to silence the opposition. And even when there is a good motive in trying to go after fake news, as there is in many countries, I'm sure, I don't think it's a practical solution. Courts are being asked to make impossible distinctions. Take the U.S. election. Donald Trump said Hillary Clinton was in poor health. How is a court going to find out about that, get to the bottom of that, decide whether that's true or not? The Clinton campaign said Donald Trump was cheating on his taxes. Good luck figuring that out, getting his tax returns and finding out whether that's happening. And so inevitably there's going to be a stalemate. And so much of this is being driven, like the example I used, not by the campaigns, but by individuals who have no connection to the campaigns, who simply, for their own reasons, have put it up. So I remain convinced that in the long run, the only solution is through the public. But let me return to where I began, because I said there are two fake news problems. One is the growth of fake news that I've just talked about. But let me talk briefly about what I see as the other problem, because in many ways it worries me more about free speech in the United States and elsewhere. That problem is the way people in power use the term fake news. The term is now used by President Trump and others to attack journalists and news organizations, not when something is false, but because it is a truth they do not like. It is a persistent and mindless attack on those who want to publish facts that the president and his administration don't want citizens to believe. When people ask me what the real danger to press freedom in the United States is, I do not believe that the law is going to be changed. I think the law is going to say the same. I worry more about what I think of as the hearts and minds problem, the campaign by the administration to convince people not to believe what they see on CNN or read in the New York Times or the Washington Post. Here I think is the critical point. If the press is not believed in a society, it does not matter how much press freedom there is. A disbelieved press is just like a controlled or repressed press. It has no power to move public opinion and serve on a check on government. It is powerless. You can have all the laws you want protecting a free press. If the press is not believed, it cannot change society. It cannot move society, and it can't be a check on government. So the constant use of fake news is really an attempt to control the press indirectly. In the U.S., we've seen how that term has been used to attack the truth, and you see it in like this tweet. Any negative polls are fake news. Okay, just like CNN, ABC polls in the election. Sorry, people want border security and extreme vetting. A poll had come out and said that a majority of the American people do not like the president's immigration policy. And so rather than question how the poll was taken or how it was interpreted or anything else, he simply declares it fake news. And that then gets combined with this attack on the press. The fake news media is not my enemy. It is the enemy of the American people. And I think that is particularly dangerous way to look at the world for a variety of reasons. But understand, the problem is not criticism of the media. Criticism of the media is important. It should happen. It's like the criticism of any powerful institution. It's an essential part of life to criticize, in a democracy, powerful institutions. The problem is the nature of the criticism. Denouncing a story on CNN or in the Times as fake news is not embracing the truth. It may sound like it, but it's not. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's asking people to skip over the analytical step of weighing what is true and what is not, and instead urging people to simply dismiss what they don't like hearing. Truth exists in the world. It gets proved to the best of our ability. I can say this in a legal setting. Think about how a trial works, right? One side offers up evidence and arguments, then the other side gets a chance to challenge that evidence and challenge those arguments. And that's how truth emerges. The other side does not get to just jump up after the presentation and shout, "Fake evidence," and get a high five from the judge. That is not how the system works. There's one other side of this problem, though, of this denouncing as fake news things that somebody disagrees with creates, and that is that I think it's becoming a danger to journalists. That this constant attention that the president has focused on journalists as the enemy of the American people, I think creates dangerous circumstances for reporters who are trying to do their job honestly. Tomorrow in the United States, hundreds of newspapers will publish an editorial about the importance of free press. It's a campaign that is taking place across the country at newspapers to remind people how important a free press is. But my concern is that as this denouncing of the press continues, it does fuel anger and encourages people to take out their anger on journalists. This was just an issue at the New York Times. The publisher of the New York Times, A.G. Sulzberger, was invited to the White House to have an off-the-record discussion with the president. So he went down to meet with the president. And it was, of course, as often is the case with with the Trump White House, it was off the record until the president found his cell phone and started tweeting about it. And so the president said that this what happened at the meeting. Had a very good and interesting meeting at the White House with A.G. Sulzberger, publisher of the New York Times. Spent much time talking about the vast amounts of fake news being put out by the media and how that fake news had morphed into the phrase enemy of the people. Sad. Well, our publisher could not let that stand because that was not what the discussion was about. As you can imagine, the publisher of the New York Times and the President of the United States did not sit around going, isn't there a lot of fake news? Oh yeah, there really is, sad, That's not how the discussion went down. In fact, here's how the discussion went down. New York Times publisher warned Trump attacks on media will lead to violence. That was really the subject of our publisher's remarks. Just last week, there was a news story about how the major TV networks in the U.S. are now hiring bodyguards for their reporters when they are covering the president's rally. And that was a chilling thought for me that in America, with all of our press freedom, that reporters for the TV networks didn't feel they could safely go and cover a speech by the President of the United States. Deeply troubling for anyone who cares about democracy. Let me conclude with this. I don't mean to suggest these problems are easy to solve. We have a problem with speech online. We have a problem with speech online. We can't hide from that. And it's not just fake news, but it's hate speech, it's online bullying, it's the malicious invasion of privacy. And those problems are really challenging for people who, like me, are true believers in free speech and a free press. It really comes down to a simple question. How do we address those problems and still have free speech? I've suggested some of the answers here today, but I obviously don't have all the answers or even a particularly great answer. It's going to take much thinking and discussing and debating, but we need to find an answer to that question, how we can have free speech and still take care of the problems of speech online. We need to have an answer if democracy is to survive in a digital age. The one thing I do know is this. These are not problems that are going to be solved in 280 characters on Twitter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor David McCraw. Those images were a mix of amusement and surprise. Yeah. Well, Jacqueline, would you want to start? Yes? Okay, so Jacqueline has some questions for you.
Okay. So my name is Jacqueline Abreu. It's not working? Can you hear me? No?
Yes, we can.
Is it working? Yeah? Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation, Clarissa and Oscar. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Mr. McCraw, Professor McCraw, for this brilliant lecture. I actually needed more time to process and to think about everything that you said. But I guess I did have the time to prepare a few questions.
Good.
So you made this distinction about between what you called media landscape 1.0, where journalism was dominated by a handful of powerful media outlets, corporations that operated following certain professional norms, so to say, and what we have now, where every internet user becomes a publisher, and there are no gatekeepers, right? And so, given this new context that we have, I would like to ask you sort of a theoretical question. How can we use free speech theories, so the marketplace of ideas and the notion of self-government, self-realization, to help us ground an argument that that would help us articulate an argument to maintain the media system and or the media law or the free speech system that we have today the way it is, even though the context and the landscape has changed so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Should I ask like all my questions,
How do
or?
you prefer? Like a set of.
I will forget the question. If
Okay, so you should take care of that.
Then next. So, and I'm happy to answer.
Just a final question related to this one. How far do these theories that were also proposed in another landscape can help us face new problems that we have today, so fake news, for example?
Yes. Okay, thank you. So, and I'm happy to talk about anything dealing with press freedom, fake news, and other topics. So if there are other things that anybody wants to ask about, I'm happy to talk about them. Jacqueline is raising a concept that I have talked about in other places and hinted at today, which is that the decisions about U.S. press freedom, which are so powerful in protecting press freedom, all came about in a different era. They were really decided in the 1960s and 1970s. And they were cases that limited the right, that limited libel suits. They were cases that limited laws designed to stop the media from publishing true information that had been leaked to them illegally. The Supreme Court said the media has the right to publish those things. So, but if you read those decisions, they were really based on the idea that there was a professional news that there was a professional news media in the United States, and they could be trusted. So one of the most famous cases involved the Pentagon Papers, the New York Times case, in 1971, where the New York Times had received a classified top-secret document, a history of the Vietnam War, and began publishing it. And the U.S. government went to court to stop the New York Times from publishing any further. The Supreme Court ruled that, in fact, the government couldn't do that they had not met the very, very high standards that must be met before the government can stop publication. Important decision. But if you read it, many of the justices were saying, in essence, we can trust the New York Times to be responsible. It was easy for them to decide that the New York Times should be allowed to publish these classified secrets because they trusted big media like the New York Times and the Washington Post to do the right thing and make a responsible judgment about whether the information would hurt society or not. Fast forward to WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden. You now have WikiLeaks publishing abroad. You have WikiLeaks publishing essentially whatever it gets and putting it out online. And it raises the question whether the Supreme Court would have come to the same conclusion had it not been the New York Times and the Pentagon Papers, but they were asked in a case involving an online publisher with no professional standards, no editors, none of the things that are typical of mainstream media. So that's really the theory, is that the U.S. Supreme Court gave great press freedom at a time when the press meant something very different. When they thought about the press, they did not think about the person with a Twitter account. They did not think about the person with a Facebook page as a publisher. Would they have come to the same conclusion? I think the answer is, and I understand that this would be subject to much debate, is those things still work, that the basic premise is still right, that trusting in citizens to make good decisions still has to be at the heart of press law. And that's what's really happened in the U.S., is that given the choice between trusting government and trusting the people, U.S. law decided to go with trust the people. There are costs on either side. If you trust the people, there are certain bad things that can happen. If you trust the government, there are certain bad things that happen. But U.S. law decided in that choice to trust the people. I'm not so naive to think that works out every time. always. You're Brazilians, I'm an American. We have one thing in common. We know that in elections people do crazy things sometimes. It's just the truth, right? But I don't think that means we should take the vote away from people. You know, we don't believe, you know, that we understand it's a democracy, we hope, is a long game, and that over time truth will emerge, citizens will value the truth, and the right decisions will get made. That's the fundamental building block of those decisions. And so even if media change, that fundamental building block to me is still the right starting point.
Should I go on or should Thais?
Yeah, we
Okay.
can exchange.
Is it working? Yes. Thank you for your invitation. And I'm very glad to be here with Mr. McCraw. And I would like to know, you've asked about if there is a balance between fake news and free speech, hate speech and free speech. What's the balance? What should be the balance between those concepts? And I think that here in Brazil, I don't know, I think also in the United States, we still don't have a concept about definition about fake news or misinformation or even about hate speech. And I think that that's a problem to have this balance, because we still don't know here in Brazil what's the definition of misinformation or fake news. As you've told us, some politicians said, I don't know, they say lies about another politician, and it's not exactly fake news, so it's not exactly a misinformation. What's the definition? What you think that should be a good definition for those terms?
Yeah, and to me, that I would like to see fake news retired as a term, because I think it's been so misused that it simply sows confusion, and you see it used when CNN makes a mistake. The president says that's fake news. CNN corrects it. That's very different from creating a website that says Donald Trump has been endorsed by the Pope. So when I think about fake news, I think it occurs when someone has intentionally set out to mislead the public with facts that that person knows aren't true. Because of the way U.S. law works, we haven't really had to face that as a legal term, as a legal concept. As I have tried to stress from time to time, the U.S. does not set a balance. Does not set a balance between reputation and the right to have a reputation, a good reputation, and the right of free speech. They do not set a balance between the right of privacy and the right of free speech. U.S. law sets an imbalance that the courts have intentionally decided that free speech matters more. That's the policy choice that was made. I can defend that. I like that. It makes my life much easier than Thais's life, because the law is so much simpler in the United States. Don't tell my boss that. Cut the filming there. But there's no question that U.S. law has said we want to create the conditions where people feel free to speak. And we understand part of the cost of that will be sometimes people will feel their privacy was invaded. Sometimes people will feel their reputation was hurt and they have no remedy. And sometimes things that aren't true will be circulated on the internet. That is the imbalance. But it follows from U.S. law. In Europe, those of you who have studied comparative law know, in Europe, there is a right to dignity, a right to privacy, and there is a right to free expression, and they are equal. And the courts there try to balance those two. When they look at a story, was that story in the public interest, or did it violate somebody's privacy? In the United States, there is the First Amendment and there's no constitutional right of privacy in the same way there is in Europe where there is that right. So the thumb is on the scale. The decision has been made that there should be an imbalance that would allow for greater freedom. And the final point on this, that if you go back and read the seminal case, the beginning case of press freedom in the United States, Times versus Sullivan, you will get the flavor of that. In Times versus Sullivan, the Supreme Court decided there were too many libel suits, and they were going to stop them because they thought the libel suits were being used by important people to silence the press, to threaten the press, scare the press, and silence them. And throughout that decision, the court keeps coming back to the idea that unless you have law that gives great press freedom, journalists and others will self-censor. They will decide that there's too much risk and decide not to publish. The Supreme Court decided that was not the system they wanted, that in the United States there should be a system where people felt free to publish without fear. And as a professor, I can argue, could there be other policy choices? But as a lawyer for the New York Times, I think it has worked out amazingly well for a free press.
So just a comment on that. I found very interesting that you started your presentation telling us about a case where the disclosure of your personal information caused you discomfort, right? But I guess you would see it as a cost for transparency and for openness, right?
I would, but I wish somebody else paid it. I paid it when I have to pay.
Okay. So my second question, I guess it looks to the future. And now in this new media landscape with the with major digital platforms, are we closer to watching a case like Twitter versus Sullivan, Facebook versus Sullivan? What's the next big free speech case now that we have such a different media landscape?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I think that the U.S. law is not likely to change a lot. I think it's so established that there may be refinements. I think that the big fight will not be a constitutional law fight in the United States, but a fight over who can sue over comments online. In the United States, as some of you know, the owner of a website has no liability for comments posted. So if someone goes on Facebook and defames you in the United States, you can't sue Facebook. You can sue the person who put it up, you can sue the person who wrote it, but by an act of Congress, there is no liability for Facebook. When the New York Times publishes a story and invites comments from readers, and the readers come on and say something that libels a person, you can't sue the New York Times. It's called Section 230 in U.S. law. I think that's a very, very likely target of the next wave. That I think that there's dissatisfaction with that system because many times the comments are anonymous. And so the person who is libeled will never have a chance for a remedy because the person who is libeled can't find the commenter, right? And I think Congress is sensitive to that, and I think Congress is likely to change the law. What they will do, I don't know. It may be that they decide that if Facebook knows something is libelous, it has an obligation to take it down, or if Facebook gets notice that it has some obligation to act. Obviously, the business model of Facebook and Twitter would be devastated if they were treated like publishers. And they would fight to the end to avoid that because there would be hundreds of suits every day if you see what's online. So I think that question of who's liable for online content is likely to be a big issue.
I've read at least 2 books recently about American authors. One is a kind of a biography of the First Amendment, and the other one is called Why Democracies Need an Unlovable Press. It's Mr. Schudson, I think, and both of them, they speak about that United States now has a press or a constitutional or with that is pro freedom of speech, but even the press wasn't like that in, I don't know, in the beginning of the 19th century, and then I was wondering, don't you think that we are coming back to another stage of press, another stage of this kind of mess that they were speaking, any newspaper was speaking about whatever they wanted, and they were not liable to the truth? And so what do you think about it?
It's a really good question, and the thing I would point to is that there is now a very interesting development in U.S. scholarship on the First Amendment. Historically, liberals have defended free speech. That was what they were about. Okay, the conservatives have always many conservatives have taken the position that it goes too far, that we need rules and so forth. But historically, the liberals have been believing that there are too many rules, that those rules should come down, that people should have the right to say whatever they want, civil liberties. We're now seeing in U.S. scholarship the liberals raising questions about whether the First Amendment is a good thing. There is recently a law review article published that's getting a lot of attention, and the title of it is, "Can the First Amendment be progressive?" No. The author answers his own question. The idea being that, in this article, that voices are not equal in the modern world, that the wealthy and the powerful have a much more powerful voice, and the First Amendment allows them to use the First Amendment to overcome other voices. There are other articles being written about how on Twitter free speech is being weaponized. That's the term they use, being weaponized, that somebody makes a statement and a lot of people disagree. Suddenly they are the subject to this toxic assault online, where people will fill up their Twitter accounts with denouncements, where there will be shaming of them, their addresses will be posted, and it's an attempt to silence. It's an attempt to use free speech to silence. So I think you're right that we're in a new era. That was not possible in the past. And everyone should be concerned about that. But I do think that, and I still believe, that freedom of speech and freedom of the press, trusting in readers, trusting in users, trusting in citizens, is the only hope we have. I just don't trust government to get it right to how to regulate that. One of the things that I try to underscore, because I understand the United States stands in a different place from many countries, long tradition of democracy, a long tradition of stability, a long tradition of presidents who don't tweet, but that's one come to an end. But you know, it didn't happen magically. The Constitution wasn't passed and suddenly there was democratic society everywhere you turned. It took about 15 or 20 years for Congress to pass the most repressive censorship we've ever seen. The Alien and Sedition Act was passed in the early 1800s. Constitution was, the ink was barely dry, and they passed a law that was designed to censor and silence critics. That's to be understood. Every time there's a national emergency, you look and you will see in the United States free speech suffers. World War I, they went after the socialists. After World War II, they went after the people they believed were communists. After 9/11, it became much harder to get information. And we were many times criticized for trying to get government information rather than simply supporting the U.S. effort to secure its borders. Those ups and downs are inevitable. And it's easy for me to say because we have the long-term view and it's worked out. But I do think that sometimes all of us react to a change in media or a change in circumstances by thinking that, well, civil liberties can't really work out anymore. And I think that is a dangerous thought. I think that the default should always be, how can we guarantee freedom and have security? How can we guarantee security and make sure that people are not being unduly attacked by people misusing free speech?
Jacqueline and Thais, do you have further questions?
I do, but I won't take any more time. So.
Yes,
Oh, okay. So we open the floor for questions from the audience. Danilo, Oscar. I'm going to take this because we are recording.
Is he in your class or something? He's deferring to you. It pays sometimes. Okay.
First, thank you very much for your presentation, for everyone. The questions were very instigating. I would like to start. I made my notes on my cell phone, not that I'm looking for Facebook or Twitter anywhere. Based on the arguments and the precedents that you have brought to us, the general idea, at least on the courts, was that the media, or at least the main media, it has some part or some idea of internal censorship of what would be or not appropriated to post. Once the president, therefore, recognized this censorship or this idea of moderation, when we are bringing directly this idea or these precedents to the modern day society where, as you said, there is an open gate where information comes directly to the population, is this still liable? Is this still the same thing? Can we still keep using these precedents, or has something changed? And I think Mrs. Jacqueline has made a question about liability. Is the same thing. Can't the media companies like Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram censorship their users? Shouldn't they do this? Because I think your answer was, correct me if I misinterpreted it, but it was they would have a lot of legal problems doing that. But why? It's their own company, it's their own service. They can choose how to, at least they should be able to choose how to sell it, or what are the basic rules. That's my question.
Very good question. And let me try to clarify my thoughts on this. Clearly, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, under U.S. law, have First Amendment rights, and they can decide what to put up and what to take down, and it's a those are private companies, and they can do that. But two thoughts come to mind. One is, I think they should do much more to address the problem of fake news. And they should also be much more open to all of us about the standards they apply, how they decide when to apply their policies. They have been really resistant to that. So I agree that Facebook should do more. The question of whether Facebook should have legal responsibility is a separate question, right? Because the first question is just as a matter of being good corporate citizenship, as a matter of ethics, should they do more to police what gets put up? And I think they should. And they should do that in a way that we see it and understand it and know what they're doing and can critique. The question of whether they should be legally liable, I think is a very complicated question, and I'm not sitting here today. I don't have a really good answer for this. There's a lot to be said for your point of view that why shouldn't they be responsible? They're making a whole lot of money selling your private data to others and not giving you a dime of it. So if they had legal liability, we would probably get a cleaned up web. They would argue that it undermines free expression, that they can't possibly have an open forum. That was what drove the U.S. Congress more than 20 years ago to protect platforms from liability. If you go back and read the original decisions on this in the original law, Congress said, look, if the platform has to read everything, they're not going to have any comments. They will simply not have comments because they'll never be able to police it. And we want the internet to be a place where there is a vigorous debate. Obviously, Congress didn't realize it would turn into a swamp. They thought it would be a... So at this point, I still think that it's better to have voluntary standards than to have the law involved. But you're absolutely right. There's an incredible case to be made that the platforms would be better if they face some sort of legal liability. Right now, they don't have to.
Okay. David, perhaps it is an unfair question, and I'm addressing more the professor than the lawyer.
Okay.
So, as you state when you are answering Thais, there is a real radical difference in the U.S. approach and the European approach. And I'm talking about democratic countries.
Yep.
In terms of content. In the U.S., there's a clear triumph of freedom of press over the other interests or rights that are important, as privacy, reputation, et cetera, et cetera. In Europe, you need to balance this. But this framework was built when we have jurisdiction and press that were territorial.
That's right.
Today, we don't have this anymore. Okay, so how do you see in the future the accommodation between these two perspectives, and how we will deal with this?
Yeah.
If we are taking the case of right of memory, of disguising what you don't want, so that you have the European tribunal say, well, you can do this, but then the same news can be placed in a different jurisdiction and I can access this. So where do you see we are going regarding this conflict of perceptions?
That's excellent. When I teach media law, I talk about how the English have balanced the right to a reputation versus the right to free speech. Now, in the United States, if a public figure sues the New York Times, the public figure has to not only prove that the story was false, but that we act with reckless disregard of the truth. That's a very difficult standard. That means the person who's suing needs to prove that we knew the story was false and published it anyway. Okay? That's why libel suits are so rare. In England, the standard is different. In England, the person suing has to show that the publisher has to show that it acted responsibly. May have got the story wrong, but it did everything a good journalist should do. Whenever I bring that up in class, there are people who say, that makes more sense. Isn't that the reward system that should be in place, that you should reward those who tried to find the truth, acted responsibly, not those who just simply thought that they were right. So I can argue that the European system actually, for many people, set a better balance. But your question really goes to, well, now there's that the New York Times is published around the world. Everybody has access to it, and the same is true in reverse. And I think that ultimately, what you're speculating here, but I think what you're going to see is that the law, for reasons I'll get into. I think the law of libel in Europe is going to look more like U.S. law, and I think the law of privacy in the U.S. is going to look more like European. There is, and part of that, I think, is where the public's mindset, where the public sentiment is. I think in the United States, even though we don't really recognize much of a right of privacy, that it is a very popular cause. And I think you see American citizens embracing the idea of a European-style privacy. On the other hand, I think in Europe, just because the internet has become so free that there's been a move to have U.S.-like concepts in European libel law. But as you say, it's the wild, wild west out there. It's chaos. You know, that the internet knows no borders. Interestingly enough, just as a final point on this, 8 or 9 years ago, 10 years ago, the U.S. became very concerned about U.S. publishers being sued abroad. So that book publishers, U.S. book publishers were being sued in England. The standards in England favored the person bringing the lawsuit and disfavored the publisher. So U.S. publishers were being sued for libel in London and losing cases that they would have won in the United States. So Congress reacted by passing a law, and that law says that if you win a libel judgment in a foreign country against a U.S. publisher, you cannot come to the United States to collect your damages. The U.S. courts are forbidden from allowing you to come to collect whatever money you're owed. That was a very powerful, powerful message from the United States that it did not believe that it had to honor judgments from other countries, and it was very controversial. But in the end, it can't work. The internet is not going to recognize those kind of differences. Our speech is going to be heard everywhere, and the truth is that if you are a publisher, you're going to be in those countries, and you're going to have to deal with their laws. And the only hope, I think, is that if we continue as Americans to press the idea of press freedom.
Further questions?
Hi, I'm Louisa, and you mentioned on the beginning of your lecture that fake news is also used to discredit the media, and there's a problem that's timeless, but Facebook amplifies it. That is that some people simply won't believe in what they don't want to believe, and sometimes I'm on my Facebook feed and there comes an article from a very reliable source, a BBC article, or from some important paper from Brazil. And when you open the comments below, there's going to be people simply saying that's not true, based on nothing. But that problem itself, it's timeless, but with Facebook, that comment gets 500, 600, 1,000 likes. And based on nothing, people simply start to disbelieve very reliable sources. I think I wanted to know if there's a way to control that without interfering in people's freedom or freedom of speech. I don't know.
Yeah, you put your finger on it, and it goes back to the point I began with, which is that we have never had the opportunity to be better informed. We've never had the opportunity to be better informed. The internet has so many answers, and at the same time, our ability to be misled and to have others misled is just incredible. The answer I'm going to give is going to be unsurprising and, again, idealistic, and I think that it really involves people standing up and saying, why do you say this is untrue? Why do you doubt this? I think more broadly, and this has come up in some of the other sessions I've been doing, I really think that the mainstream media has an opportunity to become the trusted source, that it becomes very important for mainstream media to essentially push the point that we're trying to get it right. We're not always going to get it right, but we're trying to get it right, and that you should turn to us as a trusted source. I think that mainstream media should continue the new efforts to fact check. I think that's important. I think mainstream media should cover fake news as an important political phenomenon, just like a campaign rally or a change in policy or anything else, that talking about fake news, finding out who's behind it, identifying how it's going, talking about what Facebook isn't doing or is doing about it, that is a story. That should be covered day after day, and it should be on people's radars. We had talked several times, Clarissa and I, about, well, it's fine to say that the public should be engaged and should engage in critical thinking and so forth, but how do you get there? And it's hard. But it's interesting that in New York now, when you walk down the street on the side of the bus benches, you see big signs that say, fake news is not your friend. Fake news is not your friend. And they're from Facebook. It's a public education campaign by Facebook. I think we need that. I think that's helpful. Let's remind people that they shouldn't believe everything they read. You don't have to attack any particular message or doubt any particular message, but simply trying to get people to think about their social, civil obligation to question is an important thing. I was doing one of these presentations at the University of California in Los Angeles, and I said, well, there's no role for government. And the law professor sitting next to me said, are you aware of who finances the education system in America? It's the government, okay? They have a role to play. They should be educating students on how to identify fake news, how to identify what's true and false. They don't have to jump in and make the decision, but they can certainly help people, train people for citizenship. We teach people about voting and about how the government works. We should also be teaching them about how social media works and how it doesn't. Boy, that silenced them. Okay.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Antonio. I'm a student here. And well, you mentioned this distinction between U.S. law and European law and how they treat the value of privacy and freedom of speech. Now, fake news recently has shown that it goes way beyond libel and can even challenge sovereignty and politics. Yeah. Now, how do you perceive this this tension between freedom of speech and fake news, and actually how presidents get elected?
Yeah, there is a tension between the two, and it's, if you look at places like Sri Lanka, I'll use as an example, the impact of fake news is not just funny slides that I can use in my presentation. People are getting killed. You know, fake news is being used to raise intolerance between religious groups. And I do think that, as much as I have spoken about free speech, there is a limit, and there are limits in the United States. And I think one of those limits comes when speech is being used to provoke violence against others. And I think governments have the obligation and the freedom to not allow that line to be crossed. Where I come down on the idea of things that merely mislead, and I understand the misleading can be really significant, that people can come away thinking a great deal, thinking that something wrong is right when it's not. That's the problem I see should be addressed by better citizens and better readers and better viewers. But it's not a perfect solution, and I think we need to make a choice. All of us in wherever we live, we make a choice about what the costs are associated with freedom. And one of the costs is that there may be bad outcomes in terms of people being misled. But I think that's still a better solution than trusting government to try to calibrate it. That may work in the short term. I don't think it's going to work in the long term.
Hi, my name is Bruna. And my question is more in the terms, from what I understood, all the freedom of speech that has been allowed to the press, this idea has been constructed especially because of an idea of trust in the press itself. But I think that this came from a context in which, as you said, it was in the 60s and 70s when the only one who had the ability to have such a reach and to disseminate information that would achieve millions of people was the press. And now in the context of fake news, as what I see, fake news only arose because now people have the ability themselves to individually reach a lot of other people. And that's something that wasn't real when it started being allowed as much freedom of speech to the press. And so my question is more in the terms of how do you adapt this notion of freedom to this new system where anyone can really have a really big reach in terms of what they say? And how can you really make someone responsible for knowing, individuals responsible for knowing the content of what they're sharing? Because as I see, usually fake news isn't something CNN is gonna report on and then correct later. It's something that, well, you're gonna see on your friend's Facebook page and then you're gonna share it with your other friends or in other social media. And a second point would be that, well, then we could maybe make Facebook liable, or these big corporations that are the platforms through which it's being disseminated. But at the same time, making them liable, wouldn't that give them the strength to then be agents that would be responsible for censorship, in the sense that then just because they'll be liable, there'll be more, there's going to be an incentive for them to just take out any content which they might be liable for, and that content's not necessarily going to be untruthful. And it's just, my question's more on the, how do you perceive a possible impact in terms of censorship?
Yeah, no, you raise all the right points, and you're absolutely right that we have gone from a society where a few big media companies had a microphone, and now everybody has a microphone. And you don't have to imagine why that's a problem if everybody's talking at the same time and some people are shouting and some people are shouting stuff that's untrue. And I have heard during my time here people make a very convincing case for this is the proper role of government, to try to make sure elections are fair, that it's based on truth and so forth. And you certainly make all the right points about the problems that have emerged. And let me just highlight one of those, which is that I agree with you. I'm not sure having Facebook become a ministry of truth is a better solution than having the government be a ministry of truth. And the chief executive officer of the New York Times has spent the last few months attacking that very idea that Facebook is going to tell us who's a trusted source and push that up the news feed. Now, if you think about it, that's a good thing for the New York Times, because the New York Times is going to be pushed up the news feed, but our CEO has said that troubles him because Facebook isn't telling us how they're going to decide what's trusted. And ultimately, it shouldn't be about choosing trust, but Facebook essentially creating a marketplace, showing people competing voices and giving them the choice to choose among those competing voices. So all of that, I think, is right. I don't have a good answer to the very legitimate criticisms you have of how this system is supposed to work, how people are supposed to become more responsible, other than to say I think it becomes, I still believe that's the answer. I still think that the answer comes, if you really want to have an answer, you have to have citizenship that's more engaged and engaged in critical thinking, that a government solution will be short-term. Ultimately, I think it can't work, because I just don't think the government can. The spread of fake news is so broad. I don't think you can ever expect the government to clean it up, and I don't really trust them to do that anyway. And so you end this hard process of, if it's going to get stopped, it's really going to have to be stopped by having a lot of engaged, educated, intelligent, critical thinking individuals joining in a discussion about what's true and what's not. I mean, here's the thing about technology, and some of you know a lot more about technology than I do. The technology to hide who the source is going to become greater. The ability of the producers of fake news to avoid detection is going to become greater. The fake news is going to get even faker, if you can think of that. When I was on a panel the other night in Brasilia, and one of the speakers was talking about how you had gone to a demonstration, a presentation of somebody who had made a film of Obama and taken Obama's film clip, taken the video clips, changed all the words, and you watch this video and it looked just like he was making a speech and he was saying the exact opposite of what he believed. Boy, that's going to be a hard world to separate out. I don't think government is going to be able to keep up with that technology or police that technology, and ultimately I think our fate is tied to our fellow citizens, and our fellow citizens being able to cut through and be educated and about these problems. It requires everybody in the room and everybody outside the room to make decisions about speaking up. It requires the platforms to do a better job of policing. It requires the mainstream media to do a better job of writing about fake news and exposing fake news. But as always, it's a gamble on the future. And as I said, it comes back to trust in government, trust in the public. In the United States, we've made up our mind, but that doesn't mean A, it's going to work, or B, that's the only solution.
Okay, we have two more questions.
Okay.
My name is Robinson, and first of all, congratulations for your lecture. And what I know, I believe that hate speech would more relate in freedom of expression, and consequently to a judgment of value. The fake news, on the other hand, would be more related to freedom of press, and as consequence to a fact judgment. Do you think this could justify some kind of different treatment of these two kind of?
I think the distinction you make is correct. I'm not going to surprise anybody by saying I am cleaving, despite all your excellent questions, to the U.S. model that we should be very reluctant to take on and censor speech or try to punish speech. The way I think about both of the problems is that I begin with the presumption that more speech is the better answer than censorship, that counter speech is better than government involvement. I actually think that in some ways hate speech is more easily fought through counter speech, that people standing up for the rights of others is really sort of central to democracy, and it's an appeal to everybody's sense of right. Fake news is harder to deal with as a counter speech issue, because you say something, I think it's fake, I say, look, that's fake. You come back and say, no, you're fake, and we're sort of at a standoff, right? And that's why it's so hard. But in both cases, I still think, as the default, I start with the idea of more speech is the better answer, as opposed to trying to police.
Hello, Professor.
Hello.
My name is Victor. I'd like to return to a point which you made earlier on your lecture, when you mentioned that just a few years ago, social networks in general and online players in general were still argued that what they did was no different of what a phone company did. And today, of course, this is no longer something that they can raise in their defense. And today, there's a kind of a consensus, public consensus between them, among them, that they have at least some sort of social responsibility in regards to fake content and misinformation. And well, in terms of what we're talking about when we discuss fake news, of course, we're not talking about the fact that people are lying more than they used to, but that due to big data and profiling and technologies in general, it has never been easier to find people who will buy your lies. And also it has never been easier to make money out of telling lies. So probably ever since the 2016 U.S. elections, social networks in general have been trying to adopt measures, experimenting measures in general, in trying to mitigate this phenomena, trying to mitigate the spreading of fake news and the reach of fake news in their networks, as to respond to these social expectations assume this responsibility. So, I'd like to hear from you what you think of these initiatives in general and this fact-checking and measures of sorts. What do you think of them? Are you optimistic about them?
The first thing I would say is that I do think there's a social responsibility there that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the rest can't simply take the position that they're just a platform and they have no responsibility for what takes place. It's just not the role they play. And they owe us something. They are collecting our data. They're selling it. They're not paying us for it. Okay? So they owe us something more than to just sort of shrug when these problems come up. And we saw with the scandal about Cambridge Analytica that they were, in effect, assisting in the spread of fake news. They may not have known about it, but their lax policies allowed that to happen. That's the easy part. The hard part is what should they do? And I do think that labeling things that are dubious, things that may not be true, is an important step. I think it's consistent with the democratic model to raise questions and to direct readers to places where they can see a counter-narrative. I like those solutions because they really still focus on the reader making a decision, and the platforms are helping. I know that those things are not perfect. One of the things that was happening, according to one study, is that as Facebook labeled certain things to be questionable, to be fake news, if you will, people came to assume that if it wasn't labeled, it was true. So it had the opposite effect because they couldn't label all the fake news, but people would say, oh, well, if this were untrue, Facebook would have told me it was untrue. I think that is a flaw, but I don't think that should stop the effort. I think that labeling things as fake news or questionable and providing links to stories about the same topic is important. I also think that the platforms, as they start to try to engage in social responsibility, have to be more open about the standards they apply. If you look at the community standards that Facebook publishes or any of the other platforms, they don't really give you much guidance on what is on what side of the line. And they certainly don't talk about enough about what they were taking down. That part of that I think is important so that their power can be checked too. We need to know what standards they apply, who they apply to. So just as with any other organization, any other power, we have an opportunity to monitor how they're doing. I also, as I've said in other points, I also think that the mainstream media has to cover the social platforms the way they cover government. Even though they're private actors, they're very powerful, and I think that mainstream media has to take a very close look at Facebook and its power, Twitter and its power, because that also, I think, that exposure of what they're up to will lead them to have greater accountability. Let me give you the example to close with. The New York Times has been doing stories about fake followers, about how you can buy followers so that you look like you have a big following on Twitter, or you can, or otherwise use bots to create the sense that you're somehow very much in the middle of the debate with a lot of people liking what you have to say. Those kind of stories are important to do. And those kind of stories, I think, will force the platforms to do something about bots that are misleading. There was a story about a year ago where it said that half of President Trump's followers are bots. That's, which is kind of incredible for someone who's going to spend so much time talking about fake news. We need to cover Facebook as a powerful political, social, and cultural institution, just as we would any other institution. And I think that helps to encourage accountability. What the form of that's going to take, I don't know, but that's the start, is essentially forcing them to understand they work in public, that they have to be more open, and that people are watching.
Okay, the final question. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Hi, Professor McCraw. I'm Rodrigo. I'm an NYU graduate, so it's very nice to see an NYU professor all the way in Sao Paulo.
Thank you.
My question is, in many senses, the contemporary fake news phenomenon is also a narrative about economic power and abuse of economic power. We see the Russians pouring millions on fake news propaganda, and we also see, people who can take the issue to courts to threaten to do so or eventually do so, and they do have the economic power to back it up. Which other elements do you see that are problems that heighten this issue, given that we have elections in 2018 here in Brazil and also elections in 2020 in the US? And so I would like to know, we have economic power abuse. We also have a narrative of internet access. So which other concerns may shape the issue and may shape the spectrum, the range of the fake news phenomenon?
I think that in addition to economic power that you mentioned, there's also technological power that we also are looking at people with very different access to the levers of technology and their ability to use them. You put your finger on a really hard point, and this goes back to what I was saying has been a new development in scholarship in the First Amendment in the United States, is the concern that freedom of speech is being weaponized, that it's being used by the powerful to silence the not powerful. And frankly, I don't yet have a good answer to that. I can keep coming back to the same point, but that is not to deny that it's a powerful argument that people are looking at this and saying that if there is an abuse of power, do we really not, abuse of free speech, do we really not have anything to be done about it? In one of the roles I have in the New York Times is I deal with security matters for our reporters. They get threatened all the time. And it's a hard message to say to them, well, you know what? That threat, which ruined your day and made you scared for your family, doesn't really reach the high standard of something the police can do something about. That's hard to do. It's hard for me to see that because I know people are fearful, and the internet is filled with cowards who can threaten people, who can send out a message anonymously and ruin somebody's day or week or month. But that said, as much as I'm sympathetic to that, I don't see yet a good answer for how we clean up the internet and make it a place that's a positive force for democracy rather than a negative force for culture. I just don't see that yet. But I think having the discussion and having a discussion like this one is a start, because we all need to think about it.
Well, I said that it would be the last question, and you agreed. But
I did.
Would it be okay if I posed one of my own?
You've been asking me questions all day, and I haven't had good answers. So, okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, here's the thing. I wanted not to challenge, but maybe to add another aspect to the discussion regarding the background in which freedom of the press case law in the United States took place. So you said that there was this culture of trust in a press that was built in a specific way that was probably monopolizing access to the broad audience, and that's not the case anymore. Would then the Supreme Court reach the same decisions?
Right.
Should the court have decided in this new arena? On the other hand, you presented the Alvarez case, and we are, in this case, not talking about the press or any powerful person, but the court, even then, decided that this person had the right not only to convey false propositions of fact, but to lie, because he knew he was not telling the truth. So is it the case that the trust in the press justifies, or is sufficient to justify the American model? Wouldn't be the case that we would have to recognize some other kind of dignity, even in false propositions of fact? I could summarize something, the question like that. What's the status of falsity under the American legal regime?
And you make a good point that Alvarez is not a recognition of any power of the press. It's a recognition of individual rights. And what happened in the U.S. was that after a series of cases that dealt with the press, those same concepts then get applied to individual speech and get applied to campaign finance. And summarizing all of them is that the court has a great distrust of government, a great belief in the people, and that they are going to not have speech be regulated. If I'm getting the question right, it is, is there an opening here for a change in the law? Is that?
If there are maybe like other values other than trust in the press or fear from the government that could be backing the bulk of the American case law.
Right. Well, I think that ultimately the court simply doesn't think the government has business in regulating speech, and in all of those cases, though, that you see dissenters who are saying, "Wait a minute, we've gone too far." That we can have some regulation that will actually make the marketplace work better. And that's true in Alvarez, which has a dissent which says this makes no sense whatsoever. Makes no sense, that there's no value to Mr. Alvarez's speech. Why are we protecting it? And the dissent makes an interesting point that if Alvarez was a beggar on the street asking for money and he said, help support a Medal of Honor winner, he probably committed a crime because he defrauded the person who gave him the money. is that worse? Is that how? Why should that make a difference? So there are other values that are being spoken of, privacy, the trying to make the marketplace have better, richer ideas. They simply haven't, though, captured the imagination yet of the Supreme Court, and I think people who are on that side of the argument are still looking for that string to tie all of these dissents together and say, okay, we recognize that there are competing values. I think that if there's going to be a change in how the First Amendment is understood, it's most likely to come up in terms of elections. And as you may know, the court has treated campaign finance, the giving of donations, as speech, and had been very reluctant to make any limits on that. If you are independently deciding you want to spend $1 million to promote a candidate, and I think at some point that's probably unsustainable. That at some point there is a lot of popular will to try to limit that as a form of speech and try to get an election that is more balanced so that money doesn't have quite as much control. But for right now, it's very hard as long as the Supreme Court holds on to the idea that your individual expenditures are a form of speech. I'm not sure if I got at what you were getting at.
That's...
Yeah. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see whether you finally get a court that understands technology, too, which, of course, is part of what goes on here, is that many of the judges don't really understand technology, and that as you get younger judges who have grown up with Facebook, who've grown up, will they have a different understanding and a different appreciation for the alternative values that come up. And but you see in a lot of the cases, they simply don't have, the courts simply don't have an understanding of what digital communication does and can do.
Okay, so I think we'll stop posing so many questions.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks everybody. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Well, before we finish, I would like once again to thank everybody for your presence here today. To thank you, Professor McCraw, for this wonderful opportunity, your generosity, and your excellent presentation. Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you, Thais, for your wonderful participation. I also want to thank Facebook, which is sponsoring this lecture and made it possible.
I take back everything I just said.
I want to thank Professor Oscar and Professor Ronaldo, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, for their great support. And also, once again, take the opportunity to thank Cristiana Mello from UniCeuB, who put us in contact with Professor McCraw and helped organizing the lecture. And finally, I also want to thank Sheila Jimenez, Cristine Prestes, and Isabella Jaggi for their invaluable support in setting this event up. Also, I would like to tell everybody that the lecture was filmed and it will be posted on the platform of Freedom of Speech and Democracy's page soon. And that we hope to see you all in the next events of the platform. So thank you all, and till the next opportunity.
Thank you.